Hello, I'm Dr. Roy Barsness, author of the text Core Competencies in Relational Psychoanalysis, a guide to practice, study, and research, and founder and executive director of the Contemporary Psychodynamic Institute, who is the sponsor of these interviews. In the first episode of these series, I spoke of the research behind the compilation of the text that resulted in the discovery of 7 core competencies reflective in the practice of relational psychoanalysis. Those competencies, or what I would prefer to call disciplines, are: number 1, therapeutic intent; number 2, therapeutic stance; number 3, deep listening, affective attunement; number 4, the there and then and the here and now; number 5, patterning and linking; number 6, repetition and working through; and number 7, courageous speech, discipline, spontaneity. And a separate and overarching core category was that of love. I then recruited various relational psychoanalytic writers to write about each of these disciplines, and I'm now interviewing each of them for this series. So welcome to today's episode featuring psychoanalyst and author Dr. Nancy McWilliams, who contributed to the second core competency stance attitude, therapeutic stance/attitude. Dr. McWilliams is a visiting professor emerita at Rutgers University's Graduate School of Applied and Professional Psychology and has a private practice in Lambertville, New Jersey. Many of my students have read her books, Psychoanalytic Diagnoses, Psychoanalytic Case Formulation, Psychoanalytic Psychotherapy, and Psychoanalytic Supervision. She's also edited or contributed to several other books and is associate editor of the Psychodynamic Diagnostic Manual. Former president of the Division of Psychoanalysis of the American Psychological Association, and is on the editorial board of Psychoanalytic Psychology. She's a graduate of the National Psychological Association for Psychoanalysis and is affiliated with the Center for Psychotherapy and Psychoanalysis of New Jersey and is on the board of the Austin Riggs Center in Stockbridge, Massachusetts. She's received numerous awards, including the Gradiva Prize, the Gutta Scholarship Award, the Rosalie Wise Award for Contributions to Practice, the Laughlin Distinguished Teacher Award, the Hans Strupp Award for Teaching, Practice, and Writing, and the Division 39 Leadership, Scholarship, and International Awards. In 2011, she was chosen by APA to represent the remake of the classic film, 3 Approaches to Psychotherapy. She's an honorary member of the American Psych Association, the Institute for Psychoanalytic Psychology of Turin, Italy, and the Warsaw Scientific Association for Psychodynamic Therapy. She is taught in 30 countries, and her writings have been translated into 20 languages. She specializes in psychoanalytic psychotherapy and supervision, the relationship between diagnosis and treatment, which are alternatives to the DSM and the ICD diagnostic conventions, and is interested in the integration of feminist theory and the application of psychoanalytic understanding of the problems of diverse clinical populations. Thank you, Nancy, for joining us today. It's such an honor to have you here. As I said, the outcomes of my research resulted in identifying various disciplines and practices of relational psychoanalysis. I wanted to share briefly some of the properties that evolved in that research with this slide. The first thing is that relational psychoanalysis was born out of a radical critique of the authoritarian stance. And participants in the research talked about radical open-mindedness, collaborative authority, relentless curiosity of the patient, the self, and the interplay of the two, emotional risk-taking, exploration, being rather than doing, and what happened and what is happening, and following the patient's lead by attending to the patient's affects and thoughts. Unique to these properties is that, and these disciplines, is that it is considered that these are a guide, a structure by which to provide the unique, to help us, assist us in our uniqueness and the uniqueness of the therapeutic dyad. It is not a technique that is applied, it is a spirit by which we embrace. And in this same spirit, Nancy, in this wonderful essay, offers 6 themes for how we actually enter the therapeutic space with our patients. A stance that is as much about attitude and presence in our approach to the beginnings of the work. And the 6 themes that she brings into this essay are curiosity and awe, complexity, identification and empathy, subjectivity and attunement to affect, attachment and faith. And now we're going to walk through each of these together. So Nancy, you begin with number one with curiosity and awe. And the first thing you talk about is the role and power of the unconscious and the importance to approach the unconscious with curiosity and awe. Can you say more about that to us?
Well, I think as human beings, we tend to be very vain about how much we're in control of our own mind. And I think the evidence is that we're not very much in control of it. You know, we take whatever control we can have. If you've ever seriously gotten into your own dream life, you know that dreams are incredibly complicated constructions that we can't do consciously, that have meanings and contexts and histories, and it's just amazing how complex the human mind is. And the awe is something like it doesn't just apply to how large and powerful unconscious processes are. It often applies, in my experience anyway, to the patient, the sense of awe at how the patient has managed to make a life given whatever start they had. I think many patients have the fantasy or the fear that the psychotherapist is sitting there thinking, wow, this person is really sick. When it's more likely that I'm thinking, wow, given what a bad start they had in life, how have they managed to come out of it as well as they have? You know, their unique adaptations to trauma and neglect and abuse and loss and other terrible human experiences can be awe-inspiring.
Yeah, and what you refer to here is that so many of these traumas, if you will, developmentally, and that have had to be cut off, right? And they go and they reside in the unconscious, essentially. And that you speak of how our choices in life are non-accidental, but are connected to some aspect of that self that has been cut off, that was not bearable.
Yeah, or even when it's bearable, the unconscious is busy. I'll give you an example from my own experience. I lost my mother at 9. I was the second daughter. My mother was 44. When I hit 44, my second daughter was 9.
Oh my.
And I went into a depression for a while, very mild. I was functioning and all. Thank God for my analysis, because I knew that I was, re-grieving the loss of my mother. And that helped a lot. It prevented me from being self-attacking for, being down with no reason,
Yeah.
And then one day I woke up and I was looking forward to the day. And I thought, what has happened? I'm still my mother's age when she died. My daughter's still the same age I was. And then I got curious. I wonder how many days past my mother's 44th birthday she lived. I calculated it from the day of her death back to her birthday when she turned 44. And I had gone exactly one day past that. And I just think the unconscious is an extraordinary timekeeper. Everything lightened up on that day. And I've been very impressed with anniversary reactions. People often come to therapy when it's a 10th anniversary of some terrible loss they weren't conscious of, when their child reaches the age at which they were traumatized and they're not conscious of that connection, for example. But it's all encoded somewhere.
Yeah. Well, and what I hear in all that is how essential it is for us as psychotherapists to actually be paying attention to the unconscious. That's what psychoanalysis, its uniqueness does, is it's paying attention to something, the unspoken,
Yes.
that which is trying to speak, that which is trying to get out.
Yes.
And that's, I think, part of the giftedness of a psychoanalytic treatment.
Yeah, and not just what's so-called repressed, deliberately
Right,
forgotten
right.
for some reason, but what's unformulated, as Donald Stern
Oh, I
would.
like that. Yeah. 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 Unformulated, and it's both repressed and unformulated. And I always often talk about that there's a conversation that is at hand, so that when I'm with my patient, there's this conversation we're having, but there's something else that that we're trying to find and pay attention to, that's trying to reach out to us. Yeah. And you also speak of awe in this number one, and I appreciate your use of that word, especially where you state it's intrinsically connected to humility, where we're receptive to being moved and bearing witness to the patient's story. Yeah. What do you have to say about that?
Well, what patients need from us is our witnessing.
Yes.
It's interesting. My thoughts go to Judith Herman's very recent book on truth and repair, where she talked to survivors of abuse about what they want in the way of repair. And it's not retribution or vengeance or punishment for the abusers. It's acknowledgement of what happened. It's being witnessed. It's then some kind of making amends, some kinds of prevention of future stuff. But I think therapists, often we feel we can't do enough for the patient because they've been damaged irreparably in certain ways. But we can have awe for the ways in which they manage despite their damage. And we can have awe in the role of seeing what is possible for them. They surprise us. I was trained in the tradition of Theodore Reich, whose emphasis was on letting yourself be surprised, not coming in with a prefabricated notion of what you're going to hear.
Right.
And
right.
I've been profoundly surprised by my patients.
Right. Right. And moved. Right.
And moved.
Yeah.
But yeah, bearing witness is a big part of it. What people say they want is to be listened to.
Yeah. To be received.
Yeah. And for you to be able to bear their story, which is often close to unbearable.
Yeah. 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 My thoughts are going many, many places around that. Which leads us to the complexity of the work, right? Which is your number two. And that we appreciate the complexity of this human condition, and also how people have cobbled together a life around the stories of their past. And I like your story about Lanny's balloon and Occam's razor.
Yes.
Can you talk a bit about those too?
George Lanyi was a professor at Oberlin, where I did my undergraduate work. He was a professor of political science. And he had a very European attitude, which was, it's unusual among even American college professors. It was, well, life is difficult, things are paradoxical. It was almost rabbinic. He was Hungarian, but it had that quality that I think psychoanalysis also has, that there are a million different things going on. And it was student lore that if you wanted to get a better grade on a paper for Professor Lanyi, you had to put in there something about how no single factor explanation ever accounts for anything important in international politics. You had to talk about, not only what the identifications of the people in that country were, but what were their religious orientations, what was the geography, what was the history, how had they been previously traumatized, who did they need to make a bad object, on and on and on. And we referred to this in my family as Lanyi's balloon. My husband was a colleague of George Lanyi. And it was deliberately a contrast with Occam's razor, which is scientifically a very handy rule. The shortest possible explanation is the best one. The tersest possible explanation is the best one. But that rule doesn't claim that that's always the truth.
Right.
Sometimes the most complicated explanation is the best one. And I think that's what we see all the time in our kind of work, where we're not doing experiments trying to separate out various contributants, but we're trying to see how the whole picture came together.
Yeah. It's interesting. Our patients come for Occam's razor, but they think they come for that. The simplest, just tell me what to do and let me get out of here. And psychology has fallen into that trap, I think, because ultimately the patient is saying, can you bear my complexity, the things that I absolutely don't understand, and help me recognize, see that, be in awe of my story about that. I saw a t-shirt.
I don't want to be misunderstood as feeling like the psychoanalytic approach is the only legitimate approach, because I do think there's a place for all kinds of targeted therapies and focused efforts to change symptoms. And sometimes that is a relatively simple thing to do. And I'm glad that those therapies exist. But if people want something
we do
deeper,
it ourselves, right? I was working with a patient the other day, and I literally said, "This is what you need to do. It might be wrong, but you need to do this." So it's all a part of helping our people, the people that come to see us, organize that which has been painful for them, and finding new ways to relate, I think. I want to quote you on page 93. By temperament and training, psychodynamic clinicians trying to understand all the complexities of I would just paraphrase here, the complexities of the patients who come to see us, look, and this is a key word, they look to the psychotic, borderline, body-obsessed, and sadistic parts of ourselves. They also expect, when working with anyone dealing with difficult personality problems, that their own similar issues will be activated. It's a powerful statement.
What do I have to say about that? Is that what you're asking?
Well, what I'm going to add to that, one of the things that I've been teaching now for a long time is it is common in teaching psychotherapy that we must be non-judgmental, radically open to our patients, accepting, all those kinds of things. But I think what has been missing, and what has forced me in my own practice as well as in my teaching, as I said, is what does it mean to be radically open to ourselves, so that when we are disrupted and stirred, how do we embrace that as part of the therapeutic process rather than defend against it? Because if we can't be radically open to, like you said, our own body-obsessed, borderline, psychotic, sadistic parts of ourselves, there's not going to be much freedom to be that open to our patients then. So it starts within our own process, I believe.
Yes, and what we have to fight against there is shame. If we have supervisors and therapists who do not shame us for our hostility, our sadism, our competitiveness, our greed, our vanity, and our conflicts between what we want and what we're tempted toward, and our ideas of good and bad. I mean, the human condition is not a particularly admirable condition, and we're all predators in one form or another, as well as prey. And if you aren't open to a non-judgmental acceptance of your own evil, ugliness, deficit, limitation, you're not going to be able to be non-shaming to your patient.
Exactly.
You're not going to be able to welcome that in.
Yeah. And what happens, I know for myself, is that when the patient reaches me there, which is probably my vulnerable place, is also their vulnerable place. But if I can't bear it myself, I will blame the patient. I know when I
Yes.
started years ago, when the borderline patient was so popular to talk about and how impossible they were, there was something in
Yeah.
my head going, are they impossible or is it impossible for me to bear them?
Yeah.
And I stopped blaming the borderline and shifting them to the next one and going, I got to get in touch with my borderlineness and
Right.
figure out what the heck. And I'm so pleased that that came to me because it one patient in particular who was just set the course of my work, frankly, because I thought this isn't her problem alone. It's my problem,
Mhm.
whether or not I can bear my own split off parts of me. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, and
Yeah.
we all get borderline under certain kinds of stress.
Yeah. And
Um,
yeah,
Borderline in the simply descriptive sense, not in the pejorative sense.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah. You then say on page 94, clients who feel their therapists are wrong, but trying to identify will not be shamed and will continue their engagement in the therapeutic process as they try to make themselves understood. I really like this because I also realized that if if the patient had a sense that I'm trying,
Hmm.
that attaches us, that puts us together in some way. And it doesn't matter if I'm right or wrong. It matters on, am I present and participating?
Yeah. My husband, Michael Garrett, has made a career out of doing psychotherapy with psychotic patients.
Mm,
And what he emphasizes is the intent to understand.
yes.
You can't understand why they develop this delusion or even understand what the delusion fully is. But
Yep.
if they feel that you're trying, that you give
Yep.
respect to their thought processes, they can engage in psychotherapy. And I
Yeah.
think the same thing is true for all of us. The intent to understand matters much more than understanding. I remember when I was a fairly young therapist and I was getting trained in fairly traditional drive theory models of if you get enough at the oral phase, you can move on,
Mhm.
you won't develop neurosis and so forth. And I thought it doesn't make sense that in certain countries where there's famine,
Yeah.
um, we don't see more neurosis, you know.
Uh,
So I'm thinking it must be that babies in those countries can sense that the mother wants
uh,
to feed them.
oh, I like that. Yeah.
And if you feel like your mother wishes she could feed you, it's not quite as good as being fed, but it's
Yeah.
not going to make you crazy
Yeah.
when you're not fed.
Well, and to take that story further, and maybe the depth then of love, mutual love in that situation is that she wants to but can't.
Yeah.
Wow, that would be a powerful antidote to neuroses of
Yeah, it
someone
would
wanting to
prevent
love me.
the development of neurosis that early drive theory model doesn't explain. It doesn't explain
Right.
why there isn't more
Yeah.
psychopathology where some oral needs are not met.
Yeah.
Not that
That's
there's not plenty of psychopathology in the world, but there's not that much difference from one country to another in measured
yeah.
levels of psychopathology.
That's a wonderful insight. Your next number 4 is subjectivity and attunement to affect. The common theme in my teaching has been that we feel things before we think them, and that is
Mm,
inherent to the therapeutic process to pay deep attention to the affective states that are aroused within me in relationship to my patient. It is the affect that is the royal road, I think, into our patient's stories. And in this section, I liked your statement. The difference between, quote, intellectual and emotional insight is, you say, quote, we can know something cognitively and yet not know it at all. To
yeah.
change, we need to appreciate our condition in a way that feels visceral and not just cerebral. It's beautiful. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
That's, of course, the main organizing principle of the emotion focused therapies um, that that have taken off in recent years. Les Greenberg's work, for example. partly because of some of the limitations of the more cognitive rational approaches. But
Yeah.
in psychoanalysis, we learned this a long time ago, that you don't work through stuff unless you can really feel it in the relationship, in the therapeutic relationship. And once you feel it deeply and you can name it, it can come out differently from ways that it troubled you
Yeah.
before.
Yeah. Well, and I think that we often have focused on trying to arouse the patient's affect at the cost of not attending to the affect that the patient is causing in me. And but I think in a two-person psychology, we're saying, no, you've got to feel your patient in order to
Yeah,
understand. Yeah.
absolutely.
I know
Absolutely.
my supervision work changed some time ago, where a patient would, or a supervisee would bring their patient to me, and they'd have their verbatim, and they'd have their diagnosis and what they were struggling with. And one day it dawned on me, why is this not working? And so I said, when you're sitting with this patient, what are you feeling? What's going on with you in your mind? Oh my God, it was a whole nother story. I hate this
Yeah.
patient. I love this patient. And I said, well, that's where the work is. And your patient actually needs to know these things, because that's what they're eliciting in you, to try and find something that's in themselves. And so this is really, really an important learning, I think, for us, is that our affect precedes cognition, although they almost seem to go simultaneously. But it really is our directive, I believe, in getting into the heart and soul of our patients through our own heart and soul.
Yeah, and the whole field has undergone this shift from a kind of sterile idea that if you're feeling a lot toward your patient, you're probably insufficiently analyzed, which was an early assumption,
Right.
toward the view that countertransference, or the therapist's feeling, is where the information is about what's going on. And the whole field has moved that way. Even, contemporary Freudians and ego psychologists are very clear about this now. And the relational movement has developed it to its most about elaborated forms.
Yeah. I think we're doing better than I think. We're more alive. And because another thing we're talking about, and the most recent article, the 30-year study on what creates change in psychotherapy, why did I just lose his name? But the power is in the relationship between the therapist and the patient. And if our affect is not in the room, then we're not in the room.
Yes.
And when we pull it in, then that's where I think change takes place, regardless of modality, is the presence of the therapist and patient. Yeah.
Right.
I'm embarrassed because I quote him all the time about the 30-year study that APA did, and I'm forgetting his name. Hilsenroth.
Oh, Mark Hilsenroth. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, okay. Oh, we'll leave it at that. But it was in 2019, psychotherapy, the journal APA, Journal of Psychotherapy.
Yeah, and APA put out, under some pressure from more the humanistic psychologists, in 2012, they put out a press release about what really matters in psychotherapy, and all the data showed the same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's odd. Our association often encourages us to adopt therapies that are symptom-focused, time-limited, and involve a kind of authority on the part of the therapist, using the patient as the object of our authority. And all of the data, the metadata on psychotherapy is, okay, those little treatments have their place, but
exactly.
That's not really the guts of psychotherapy.
Right. I like the word you borrow from Young Brule, the word cherishment.
Oh, yeah.
Say why you chose that, and say more about it and your understanding of the importance of cherishment. I think we're already bumping up against that.
Well, first of all, Elizabeth Young Brule was somebody I greatly admired. She was a scholar. She was an early person of minority sexual orientation who insisted on being taken seriously as a psychoanalyst back when it was, in many of the institutes at least, it was considered evidence of psychopathology if you were a lesbian. And she was brilliant and she understood philosophy. So she was one of those people that I just plain admired. But she was looking for a term like Takeo Doi's term. There's a term in Japanese that amai, I think it is. I'm probably mispronouncing it. It's something like the Greek notion of agape, which is not erotic love. It is a kind of, I want you to flourish. And our term love gets easily confused with erotized versions of love, and not the kind of devotion, prizing of the other person, the cherishing of the other person, which has nothing to do with your having an erotic agenda. It just has to do with, well, Hannah Arendt talked about love as I want you to be.
Yeah.
Something that Stephen Cooper quotes in some of his writing. That's, I think, what Young Brule and her colleague in that book on cherishment were trying to capture, that attitude of, I cherish you.
Yeah. Think of therapy that holds that stance, Nancy, where I want you to be, or the word you use, I want you to flourish. And to walk into that space alone has got to be healing. I mean, it's such a powerful idea that I, as the therapist, am here because I want you to flourish.
Yeah. I mean, it's not totally selfless. It's like, this is how I make my living, by working with a certain number of people and making a commitment to their thriving.
Yeah.
So it's not like I'm anything beyond a normally loving person, but that's my job with you. Steve Mitchell once, a patient, he told the patient he'd been worried about her, and she said, "You worry about me between sessions?" He said, "Yeah, that's what therapists are. We're professional worriers."
Right. I saw a T-shirt the other day. I thought it was perfect for therapists. It says, "Just give me a moment. I need to overthink this." So yeah, our minds are very busy folding many thoughts on people, right?
Yes.
You also say in this essay that you struggle to choose the term faith as your number 6 structure for therapeutic stance. But in the end, it was the best descriptor of what you wish to communicate. And what you say is faith is a gut level confidence in the process, despite inevitable moments of skepticism, confusion, doubt, and even despair. Can you say more about this?
Well, it's funny when you said process there, and I heard my own words coming back at me. I thought of the mourning process, that when you're in mourning, it can feel horrible.
Yeah.
And yet, if it's mourning and not depression, you will get out the other end of this process. So that's a kind of odd parallel that came to my mind. It's not a hope for a particular outcome. It's faith in a process. It's sort of like, if you're a parent and you have faith that if you do your best with your kids, they're going to come out all right. But you can't predict how they're going to come out. You can't control how they're coming out. That's not your job. You do your best. There isn't a word other than faith, really, to describe that kind of combination of activity and passivity, of bearing witness and knowing that this is going to be eventually helpful. And I think that's a problem now for many therapists who haven't had their own psychotherapy. Because I can't imagine having that kind of faith in the process, except as a result of my having gone through a very deeply meaningful psychotherapy and come out the other end, even though there were moments in that therapy that were very difficult, or when I felt hopeless, or I was enraged.
Yeah. I wonder if, I guess I could just ask you, but I wonder if you struggled with using the term because sometimes faith has been misunderstood as truth. Because you
Oh,
go, yeah, I was wondering why you struggled with it.
well, I thought, I think the idea of faith has, for me, been influenced by my own background in a Christian upbringing. I think that did affect me greatly. So there's certainly a way in which, to me, it has religious overtones,
Yeah,
that
right.
concept. But I certainly didn't want to imply that it was like the faith equals truth that you're mentioning, or that it implied a particular religious stance or lack of a religious stance. I was in an Eastern European country at one point, and somebody began talking to me with this great enthusiasm, and I realized she had misunderstood my use of the word as meaning that I supported a very formulaic version of Christian counseling, as opposed to the openness to being surprised that
Yeah,
I was trying to stand by.
yeah,
So I thought maybe I did use the wrong word there, because people can put their own religious meanings into a word like faith, but I couldn't think of another one. And of
right,
course, the
right,
great religious traditions are all about trust in something bigger than the
right,
self.
right. Well, I think you do a beautiful job in the book in clarifying that, beginning with faith is a gut level confidence in the process, uh, despite skepticism, confusion, doubt, and even despair. Like in the midst of all this, I think we're going to get somewhere. And then I think with the truth part, you said whether or not we can find the truth about any matter, we can speak truthfully about it. And you quote Levinson, who said, it may not be the truth arrived at as much as the manner of arriving at the truth, which is the essence of therapy. That there's not, that you, I think you did a really nice job saving yourself, if you will, around the use of a very powerful, good word, faith, which is very different than denominational or whatever religious kind of ways that it's been mishandled. So yeah, do you want to say something about the truth? I really like that as well, where I don't feel like I have the truth. Like one of the things I have discovered in the research is this idea of courageous speech, discipline, spontaneity, that the way that I must bring the things that I don't want to bring very often into therapy because they're scary. They might be misunderstood, all
Yes.
sorts of things. But if I come with the idea that it's not the right interpretation or
Right.
it's not the truth, but I'm saying I'm pulling it out of myself to saying, here's a thought about it.
Yeah.
And a patient said to me the other day, I like what you do is you say this idea or this word came to me, but it isn't that it has to be. They get to then work it with me. And I
Yes.
think that's what you're getting at here.
Yes. I don't know if you know Michael Guy Thompson's book on the ethic of honesty.
Yes.
But before he wrote that book, which I very much like, because I do think that psychoanalysts adopt an ethic of honesty. I think that was Freud's major contribution, that we have to try to be honest with ourselves at deep levels. I was thinking about calling a book The Habit of Honesty.
Oh, nice.
Because in some ways, we can't know the truth, but we can be emotionally honest, or we can, no, we can't be fully emotionally honest. We can try to move toward an ideal of emotional honesty. And my experience is like yours. When I put things tentatively, then my patient can join me in refining the idea. Or when I have to acknowledge something painful. I remember a very paranoid woman I had worked with. I came into the office one day 5 minutes late, and she was sitting on the edge of her seat saying, I knew this would happen. You hate me. You want to reject me. You're late because you can't stand working with me. And I said, no, actually, I was late because I couldn't get off the phone with somebody. She didn't calm down at all. And in the face of her eyes like saucers, I thought to myself, okay, Nancy, you got to do a gut check. Is there a grain of truth in what she's saying? And I said, wait a minute, let me just think about what you've said. And I just took a couple of minutes and I said, I think it's true that I was on the phone. I was trying to get somebody off and it wasn't working. But I think there is some truth in what you say, that you and I have been working on really difficult stuff lately. And there was some part of me that was happy that I had a reason to kind of put it off. She calmed right down.
Exactly.
And she could make the distinction then between, okay, it's been hard on my therapist and she acted out a little, as opposed to you're totally rejecting me.
Yeah.
But that was hard. I find that very hard. I mean, therapists like to be seen as good.
Right.
And,
yeah, the beauty of that. And Harold Searles tells the story of a patient coming to see him saying, I'm done with you. I'm not going to work with you anymore. You don't like me. And he said, oh no, come on in. Let's talk this through, et cetera. She says, no, I'm literally done with you. He then reflects upon that. And he goes, you know what? She was right. And I didn't have she was right. I needed to let her know that in order for our work to go on.
Yeah, it probably would have gone better if you'd said, sometimes I feel like I'm done with you too.
Exactly.
And I think we can survive this.
Exactly. Yep. Yes. Oh, Nancy, this is very good. Can you think of any other case examples that you might want to offer to our listeners of your work and of this kind of stance of what I would say authenticity?
Well, you told me you might ask me for a case example.
Yeah.
And the woman who comes to my mind, partly because I don't face any confidentiality problems with her, because nobody in her real life, and she's dead now, knew about her internal struggles. But she was I was astonished to learn this. She was a high-level executive in an all-white male, big, important corporation. I didn't know that when she first came to me, because the way she entered the session was like a terrified animal. She would sit in the chair and she couldn't speak. And she started wringing her hands and nodding and muttering to herself. I knew I couldn't do this. I couldn't possibly do this. This is a very competent woman in her mid-50s. She would walk in, and as long as we were talking about the weather or how was the drive, she was fine. As soon as she sat in the patient's chair, she looked like an animal in a trap. And there's so much to say about her, but about the group of things that I identified in the part of your book that you published. And in terms of those, I had to take, first of all, I was just curious, what has reduced this super competent person to this animal in a trap? And my first challenge was, how do I get her to minimally relax so that she can talk? And so often what we face with our patients is nothing that our textbooks prepared us for. There's no textbook that says, well, when the patient comes in, sits down, looks like an animal in a trap, rocks back and forth and mutters to herself that she can't do this, what do you say?
Right.
So I spent, several weeks, because she started this way every time, just trying to understand her experience and to make her minimally comfortable with me. And her problems were very overdetermined, as we often say. That she felt like a fraud. She was a very, in diagnostic terms, she had a very schizoid personality, extremely highly sensitive, introverted, and she had developed this whole false self that was highly functional in a dissociated self state in her work. But she came to me saying, I said, what made you made you come at this time? She said, I have no life. I have the unlife. She lived alone. She had no relationship. She had no kids. She had no hobbies. She used to like to garden, but now she was depressed and didn't want to garden. I wasn't sure how I could help her, but I eventually was able to feel my way into what she felt, and what she felt was like the child who shouldn't have been born. It turned out that she was probably the daughter of her older sister, raised by people who said they were her parents, who were resentful of her, and made her feel throughout her life as if, if she hadn't existed, the family would have, done much better. And so she sort of did this constant effort to rectify not existing with existing minimally, and she and I really struggled with each other, and interestingly, the first times that she seemed more alive to me, it came into the session via her hostility. She started bringing me hostile cartoons. She started telling me she was entertaining the guys with which she worked with stories of some of the ridiculous things I had said.
Wow.
Oh yeah, I see a shrink. You should, that kind of talk. And I felt there was a vitality that started to come through in her resentment that she'd had to come to see me at all. And one of the most moving things that happened to me was, this was before caller ID. I got these 2 hang-up calls where I heard that somebody was on the line and then they hung up. And I just had the strongest intuition. I think that was Sarah, with her struggle about talking and not talking. And I called her and I said, this may be completely crazy, but I just got these 2 hang-up calls back to back. And I had the strongest intuition it might be you trying to tell me something and then running into your problem doing it. And she said, yes.
Yes.
I said, well, you got me on the phone now. Can you try to tell me what it is that's so hard to tell me? And she started to cry, which she had never done in session. And she said, I want you to know that I do want to talk to you, but it hurts too much. And that was the beginning of our being able to give her some help.
Well, I think that pace represents so much of these 6 things that you've taught. You were very curious, right? And you had a sense of awe, like, what is going on here? And you're trying to pay attention to unconscious content and the complexity of this woman's story and the story that was being now relived with you, and tending to an affective experience and having faith in the middle of, I don't know if I can reach this woman, but I'm still going to try. And you did. So I think that in that case that you just presented, you captured very nice the 6 themes in this in your work and in this chapter.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. We're coming to an end, and I'm just in. Do you have any last words you'd want to say to our listeners?
No, I'm honored that you wanted to have me on the program, and I hope those of your listeners that are studying to be therapists have as rewarding a life in this field as I have had. It's a very meaningful way to make a living.
It really is, isn't it? Yeah. Well, Nancy, thank you. It's just been delightful to be with you. Thank you.
You're very welcome. I enjoyed it.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.